Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, one day after the Lone Star State debate, which happens to be the last debate that we're going to have before Super Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, or as my first officer Jeremy Grapenton likes to call it, Super Cruise Day, we see that once again, the facade of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus being a truly articulate conservative just isn't there. He receives the endorsement of failed presidential candidate and New Jersey Governor Krispy Kreme Christie. Now, we've made fun of Christie a fair amount during the past debate shows. Hamburger seems to represent all he thinks about. And remember, folks, that before Donaldus Julius Caesar got into the race, Christie had always prided himself on being the abrasive one, the one whom people thought was a quote-unquote straight shooter. Of course, it got him into a lot of trouble. Think back to the 2012 presidential election cycle where he gave that, what was supposed to be the primetime speech for the Romney camp, and it fell. It was a dud. It was all about himself. It showed that he, like Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, cares most about himself. And you see, folks, this once again shows that Donaldus really isn't an outsider. He has received partial endorsements from people like Bob Dole, the failed 1996 gutless opposition party candidate, and he is preferred by the establishment to the proven, constitutionally principled Texas Senator Ted Cruz. That is amazing to see that one northeastern blowhard throws his weight, quite literally, behind another northeastern blowhard. Folks, this entire election cycle has been far too contentious. The Republicans have violated what is known as Reagan's 10th commandment, that of thou shalt not speak ill of thy fellow Republicans. But the Republican Party has discarded with that from an early stage in this entire fiasco. And the reason that they've done that is the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, what is colloquially known as the establishment wing, literally loathes and despises anyone who would attempt to step in the way of their go-along to get-along approach. I've said on past episodes of the Wright Flyer that the reason that I use the term detente is that I pull it out of a page of the live and let live mentality that plagued the Republican Party with respect to the Soviet Union. It was Reagan that took us away from that. And remember, everyone said that he was unelectable. And yet he proved to be one of the best candidates we had in living memory, although he is not quite as conservative as I would like. But I admit that I am more of a hardliner when it comes to the conservative line. I am a die-in-the-wool constitutionalist. This is because I understand that as per Article 6, Clause 2 of that sacred document, the Constitution itself constitutes the supreme law of the land. I don't believe that you can waver on that, and I don't waver on it. Neither does my first officer, nor does our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward. So, we see now that the ducks are starting to line up. Christie is throwing his weight behind another loser. And the reason that I say that he's throwing his weight behind another loser is when you look at the vast majority of the polls for the general election, pitting one candidate against Hillary Clinton, everybody performs better against Madam Clinton than Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. Now, I'm sure that may have many of you asking the question of, well, why is that? What is it about Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus that makes him incapable of winning in the midterm, or not the midterm, but the general election? Well, folks, that comes down to his abrasive style. It comes down to the fact that he really is an establishment type in sheep's clothing. Yes, he speaks a good game. Yes, what we're witnessing on blatant and full display is voter outrage over the numerous and incessant betrayal by the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. Just think back to the midterm elections of 2014 and all the verbose and grandiose promises that the gutless opposition party made when we, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, the American people, handed them a clear mandate to stop Obama. They roll over. They coalesce. Basically, they collaborate with those forces that are hell-bent on tearing our country apart at the seams. That is why the voters are outraged. But there is one mistake that the voters are making, something that they're just not taking into consideration with this entire election cycle, and that is this. Ted Cruz is not an insider. Ted Cruz has been a stalwart warrior for the Constitution, defending it more times before the Supreme Court than any other licensed Texas attorney, and I say this as a licensed Texas attorney myself, and arguing 9 times in front of the Supreme Court to defend our fundamental and inalienable rights. Stop and think about that for a moment, folks. He did this at a young age. He is one of the most accomplished defenders of our rights. You can't say that about any of the remaining candidates who stood on that debate stage last night. You can't say it about Dr. Ben I'm a Victim Carson. You can't say it about Narco Rube EIEIO, and you damn sure can't say it about Donaldus Caesar Trumpus. Folks, another reason why the Donaldus can't win this coming election is because of his inability or his unwillingness to actually speak with respect to particulars regarding his proposals. Perhaps it's in his own mind that he doesn't need to provide the particulars. He's always been surrounded by sycophants and yes-men in the Trump empire, and he thinks that that is the way that things will continue now, that somehow his word is a catalyst that will just make it happen, make it materialize out of nowhere. I'm sorry, folks. But when it comes to our fundamental and inalienable rights, we simply cannot afford to gamble in such a reckless fashion. In fact, I say that we can't even afford to gamble at all, because our rights, our liberties, and our sovereignty are non-negotiable. We have to be stalwart with respect to that. We cannot bend or waver on that, because if you bend or waver on that, and if you lose your rights, you have absolutely nothing. That is the central tenet of our representative Republican form of government. It is the solid conclusion that George Mason came to when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia, that was the litmus upon which the entire Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, was based upon. These are the facts and realities that we cannot escape. When you look at all of the candidates who remain in the race, vying for the highest office in the land, that of President of the United States, only one has provided a surefire plan which is deeply rooted in our shared Constitution. And when you remember that our Constitution is the supreme law of the land, that is our ticket to success. Now, I know that some of those polls are showing that Cruz would only be winning by a fraction of a point against Madam Clinton. But remember, at this point, the candidates have just been attacking each other, more so than the opposition. That is what has weakened us. That is what makes the Democrats think that there's blood in the water. But to a point that Rush Limbaugh made on his program yesterday about it being strange that the Washington Times would be demanding that the detente wing of the gutless opposition party step up its attacks on Donaldus Caesar Trumpus, there's a reason for that. He said that it was because the good old boys club, or the good old boys and gals club, what we call the elitist establishment, don't want to admit someone who's not part of the club. And he never really will be part of that club. They just admire him for his money. And they don't even admire him, it's that they admire his money. And Donaldus has done everything to live up to that image. He has been greasing the palms of politicians for decades now, for at least 30 years. That clearly speaks as to the problem we have. The outrage that the voters are feeling, the idea that they're going to put a vengeance candidate on the ticket. What they're forgetting is that their vengeance ought to be directed at the biggest donor who funded and supplied campaign finances to a vast majority of the members of the Gang of Eight who were developing that amnesty plan, that carpet amnesty plan of 2013, of which Narco Rube EIEIO was a principal architect. That is who they should be drawing their anger and ire to the most. But here's the problem. When you're blinded with pure anger, and believe me, folks, anger is absolutely understandable here, and anger can be harnessed to create good things, but it must be tempered by logic. It must be tempered by reason, because when you have reason driving righteous indignation, then you are able to create things, because that is the force that drove and inspired our founding fathers to take the steps necessary to not only take on the greatest and most organized military power known to the world at that time, the British Empire, but also to win. It takes passion, zeal, and dedication, but it takes logic, reason, and virtue as well. And again, there is only one candidate who is still vying for that type office, that high office right now, as I speak into this microphone, who has been consistent with his anger towards the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, but also with the reason and virtue that is the successive spirit of our founding fathers. You see, when a nation is in the midst of an identity crisis, as the United States of America is right now, you need to go back to basics. I know that I've repeated this on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, and I'm going to repeat it again here. The reason I say that you need to go back to basics is that it is through the basics, the Constitution, that you will find the key to unlocking the problems that face us, to unlock the way to resolutely respond to the issues without trampling upon our civil liberties and without losing the identity of the country. You see, folks, that is the very important fight that we are currently engaged in. We are fighting for the very lifeblood of this country, and we cannot risk it gambling on a charlatan, snake oil salesman, and a fraud. You know, Rubio was right to hit Donaldus last night on Trump University. I know that we have mentioned it in one of our previous episodes, but think about that, folks. Donaldus actually went in front of cameras and said, yes, I handpicked the teachers for Trump University. Yes, I have affixed my name to this for-profit institution. But he didn't. Folks, that is an outright fraudulent statement. It is fraud in the inducement, to use legal terminology for this. And the reason that I can say that is he used fraudulent statements to induce or dupe people into signing up for and departing from their hard-earned cash for a system that failed to deliver what was promised. That is a charlatan. That is the P.T. Barnum style of business. And remember, P.T. Barnum was the one who allegedly coined the phrase that there's a sucker born every second. Now, I want you to stop, pause for a moment, and consider. Is that the type of characteristics that can win in a general election? No. And the fact that he is the former largest donor for Hillary Rotten Clinton for her time as the senator from the state of New York, it means that the choice, if by some cruel twist of fate, Donaldus J. Caesar Trumpus winds up being the gutless opposition party nominee, our choices would be between a criminal and a sleazy businessman who was her top donor. You see, folks, that's the cronyism that you're angry with. That's what has enabled these sniveling politicians to crawl out of the woodwork and begin to work their twisted machinations towards destroying this great representative republic of ours. There's no way to mince words about that, folks. That is just the truth. I'm just talking facts here. So, again, yes, while it is understandable that the voters are angry, blind passion will lead us over the edge of the precipice, plunging us into the abyss of doom, destruction, death, chaos, and above all, anarchy. We don't want anarchy. We want to save what is ours. We want to save the supreme law of the land that is based on natural law tenets which are by their very nature timeless. Because if we fail to do that, then we have let down not just our forefathers and ancestors, but the generations that are up and coming and those which have yet to be born. You know, that is such a powerful and daunting burden and responsibility. But it is one that we have never shirked before. It is one that we have never failed to rise to the occasion to stand up to those enemies and those nefarious forces who would do anything in their power to destroy this great system of ours. This revolutionary vision that the people are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, government by consent. Folks, that is what our founding fathers understood. And they understood inherently that that aspect of the character, heritage, spirit, and national identity of the American people is absolutely non-negotiable. Yet people are just absolutely enamored with the Cowardly Lion from The Wizard of Oz. The Cowardly Lion, who was originally a representation of Williams Jennings Bryan, a populist candidate of the late 19th century who advocated bimetallism and gave a notorious speech of a cross of gold. He was unable to do anything. Why? Because he didn't have the real spirit of it. He didn't actually believe what he was saying. If you hold a mirror image of that time to today, you will find that we are facing similar crises. Now, granted, the notion of terrorism is absolutely different. And the notion of the torrent of illegal aliens flooding through our porous southern border is quite different than what we faced then. But on the whole, the country was in an identity crisis. The country was facing the rising tide of progressivism as created and personified by Republican Theodore Roosevelt. America had just come out of the Spanish-American War at that time. Therefore, William Randolph Hearst and his media empire had started yellow journalism, which has now become our 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week propagandistic wing of the Fabian movement in this country. All of the groundwork was there. And so when it comes to the battle for the soul of the United States of America and its popular sovereigns, we find that the issues are repetitive. And the reason that these issues are so repetitive is simply that we, the American people, have failed to learn from our past mistakes, and therefore those who don't learn history are doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. However, I do have supreme confidence and faith in the ability of the American people to realize just how important this struggle really is. I have absolute faith in the American people to stand up, to unite together, to be the powerful voice that we have always been since the inception of our country well over 2 centuries ago, and to say enough is enough. We will not be duped. We will not allow the establishment to play this game and to plunge us back to the status quo, because the status quo, the failed policies of the Fabian socialists that want to centralize all power and control in an almighty, unstoppable government, is diametrically opposed to what our founding fathers believed with respect to this country. Stop and think about that for a moment, folks. When we say that the United States of America is in a battle for its soul, I don't say something like that lightly. I don't say something like that as to make the people think that we don't know what's going on, that we have forgotten who we are as a people. I say that because it is so important for us to take the steps necessary to prevent anything like that from ever happening in this great representative republic of ours. That's not an easy step to take. And so going back to Krispy Kreme endorsing Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, we see that there is a disconnect between a particular portion of American society and the vast majority of the popular sovereigns. And that disconnect relates to the fact that, yes, there are differences of opinions at various points in the country. This is why the founding fathers believed that the tenets of federalism, where the states are possessive of more authority than the federal government, was necessary. And that's because the closer the level of government gets to the people, the more power the people are able to exert over that governmental entity. That is part of natural law. Because when you examine the natural law structure, it starts with the fundamental building block of society. And as I've said on past episodes, the fundamental building block of society is none other than the nuclear family. So, government starts within your home. Government power or authority comes from within you. And the contract that governs the proper scope and application of government can be found in the various constitutions of the several states, and ultimately in the greatest social compact or contract that has ever been devised by the hands of man, yet inspired by divine providence, is our shared Constitution. Think of it this way. The Constitution is the agreement that government has with us. It is an agreement that defines what our fundamental and unalienable rights are, that they are endowed to us by the God of nature. the Judeo-Christian God. I know that's going to annoy some, but facts are facts, and that is the fact. And the American people. So the American people receive their fundamental and inalienable rights from God on high, God omnipotent, which means that no legitimate, rightful earthly authority can abridge, encroach upon, destroy, deny, or take away those rights without due process under the law. And again, the way that our court system is established shows just how much impetus and importance the Founding Fathers placed on the notion that we, the American people, are the popular sovereigns, meaning that we wield the ultimate authority in this country. The way that our government exists is that we delegate power through that contractual agreement, which is a compact between every American citizen and the government. And that means that if the government is in breach of that contract, then we, the people, can retract the delegation of power that allows the government to exist, to start again. And that is found within the preamble to the Constitution itself. We, the people, were the ones that came together in order to form a more perfect union. What was the purpose of that union? The purpose of the union, without any question, is to defend our fundamental and unalienable rights. And the way they defend it is to ensure that they do not encroach upon it and that outside threats do not encroach upon it. But ultimately, as can be seen by the Second Amendment, and why it is so critical and crucial that we choose a candidate that will actually nominate a Supreme Court justice who will defend our rights, is we the people are the ones that ultimately must protect our rights. That is why we have the Second Amendment, that fundamental and unalienable right to keep and bear firearms. It's not to go hunting, and it's not just for self-defense of home. It's to protect all Americans from any threats, which includes the federal government itself. That is who our founding fathers feared. And stop and think about that again for a moment, folks. What is it about the federal government that made our founding fathers so nervous? Well, it was a centralized authority. They had just spent a long, bloody, drawn-out war for independence against a centralized authority, that of the crown. And when you look at the debate, that fierce debate that raged throughout the country before the adoption of the United States Constitution, because you must remember that the original Union was created through a document known as the Articles of Confederation. It didn't give the central government enough power to actually move forward to protect the inalienable rights of the citizens. It didn't even recognize as much the inalienable rights of the citizen. We saw that first appear within the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson's beautiful words did speak about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the debate that raged on when they were going to create this Constitution that would allow there to be a true federalist system, there was a fear that the whole notion that by right of birth, the American citizen is sovereign, that could be taken away from an all-powerful central government that has full control over everything. That was the concern. Pardon me. And as you can see, that concern was not far-fetched. We see now that the federal government is attempting to redefine sovereignty. Remember what sovereignty was at the time the American Revolution broke out. At that time, in absolutist countries and autocratic countries like France and Russia, The sovereign was the state, and the state was the sovereign, and that was confined or condensed into a singular entity, the king. England had a little bit of a different process, and this goes to show the natural law was an evolutionary process. When you go to Magna Carta, which happened in the time of King John I, remember Richard the Lionheart's younger brother, the barons came together and said, no, we have rights and we will have a parliament and we determine what taxes you can move forward with. And then gradually over time, that was expanded to include the subjects. But at the time of the American Revolution, the way that it worked was that the king was sovereign, but with the consent of Parliament, and Parliament was the representatives of the governed. This, too, was kind of an idea that was born out of Oliver Cromwell's protectorate. The protectorate was an attempt to get away from the autocratic king. Our founding fathers took it to the next logical conclusion, and that is found within our Constitution. And this is why the Constitution is so important, and history is our guide to show us what does and does not work with respect to our constitutional form of government. The purpose of government has been lost, and the roles have been reversed to a point that if our founding fathers were walking amongst us today, they would be absolutely horrified at what the popular sovereigns allowed. But they would equally be horrified by the fact that a charlatan, a snake oil salesman, a man whose past is mired with the very fraud and corruption that make the people irate, is able to dupe huge swaths of the American populace, of the popular sovereigns. They would be flabbergasted because they wouldn't recognize the nation they helped forge. This is not mere nostalgia that I'm speaking of here. This is law. We are talking about the United States of America being a nation of law and not of men. That is the crucible upon which this country was established. Men fought and died for that cherished belief, and we cannot just let it die with a whimper. What frustrates me so much about this 2016 presidential election cycle is that we are on the cusp, the edge of correcting the problems that face this country. We are near the point of restoring it because we have a candidate who can empower the people to do that. But the charlatan's tricks are working. Yet throughout it all, we, the popular sovereigns, must recall that the power of this great republic of ours absolutely rests in our hands. We are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty. But the Fabian socialists have been so successful in brainwashing the people. Over the past century, they've taken over our institutions of education, and they have erroneously told the people that the government can take care of you. That's the responsibility of government. And you can see it with the charade that they put out claiming that the Constitution is all just about negative rights. You see, that game of semantics that we here at the Wright Flyer have been warning you about since our inception, since our first show, which aired on September 11th, 2015, that game of semantics has been used. Negative, negative, negative. That sounds bad. That anything that is negative must, by correlation, by its very nature, be bad. But it's not. What it is doing is saying no to the government. No, the government does not have rights. Only the popular sovereign. We, the people, only we have rights. That is what we have to get back to. That is what we must embrace if we want to kindle an American Renaissance, and if we wish to bring this country back to the lofty heights that it has achieved in its relatively brief yet illustrious history. And again, history shows us another undeniable fact that speaks to the limitless brilliance and foresight of our founding fathers. Of all the governments of the world today, the United States of America has the longest contiguous, meaning uninterrupted, constitution in all of world history. Think about that, folks. That is stability. But Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus does not speak of stability. He does not advocate stability. He does not stand up for stability. He is an agent provocateur of chaos. He is absolutely an agent of chaos itself, and he is doing it for self-interested reasons. Think about the victory speech that he gave after the Silver State of Nevada's caucuses. I love the poorly educated. Folks, the people in that audience, being so swept up in emotionalism, may have thought that what he was saying there was a compliment. That's no compliment. That is a snub. That is a charlatan thinking that he is superior to the popular sovereigns. Haven't we had enough of that with the disastrous 2 terms of Barack Hussein Obama? Haven't we suffered enough already through his tyrannical and despotic regime? And you know, folks, we would have had that if Christie had been a viable candidate. So once again, this endorsement of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus by the New Jersey Governor Chris Christie speaks volumes about who the man is. Christie was anti-gun. Donald Trump was anti-gun. Both were falsifying their records, trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the true popular sovereigns to convince them that they were actually more conservative than what reality would show. We are but 4 days from Super Cruise Day. And as I've said before, I'm not telling you how to vote, but I am making a case to you on what we, as popular sovereigns, must do if we want to succeed. And folks, we must succeed. This is the tipping point. We have reached the point of no return. It's either going to be a principled constitutionalist, or we need to batten down for the worst squall that has ever hit this country. Our liberty, our identity, our sovereignty, and our security, all of these things are at stake. Each and every one of them is at stake. And remember, these things are non-negotiable. But what is the Donaldus's message? I'm a great negotiator. I would negotiate with Nancy Pelosi. I would negotiate with Harry Reid. Of course he would. He donated to them. He obviously likes them. He said that he's had a pleasant working relationship with them. We don't need a pleasant working relationship with those who are hell-bent on depriving us of our fundamental and unalienable rights, who are hell-bent on destroying this great representative republic. Folks, we are the last best hope for freedom and liberty left in this world. And if you want to see another characteristic that absolutely fits Donald Trump, look at another man who didn't officially endorse him and whom Donald has taken very little to separate himself from. Former KKK or Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke, a failed Louisiana Congress candidate, a man who still peddles hate and divisiveness, a man who has embraced the tenets of National Socialism, the ideology of Hitler and the Nazis. Folks, we cannot unleash that in a representative republic of ours. Such a system would be contrary to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared Constitution, and therefore, once again, pursuant to the Supremacy Clause found in Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared Constitution, such a system would be illegal, null and void, void ab initio, or absolutely unbinding from the beginning. That is who Donald is. Actions speak louder than words, and the man flip-flops worse than John Kerry windsurfing on a gusty day. You see, that sank the candidacy of John F. Kerry. And it will sink Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus in the general election. That cannot be allowed to happen, because if we walk down that precarious path, we are putting our civil liberties at jeopardy. And remember, those things are non-negotiable, because you negotiate that and you begin to whittle away at the very identity, heart, soul, and lifeblood of this great republic of ours. We must return to sanity, and sanity would require that we embrace the tenets that made us great in the first place. Sanity would require that we, the American people, come to the realization that all that has made us great is in direct threat, dire threat. But it falls upon we, the people. It is ultimately our duty and our responsibility to stand up for our country. No one else can do that. That is the very design of this representative republic. That is what our founding fathers believed in, because it was we, the people, that came together to throw off the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny and bondage. But the historical revisionists want to erase that glorious chapter of our shared history. They want us to be ashamed of it. They want to rewrite it as a divisive, balkanized history. But that's not who we are as a people. You know, when Barack Hussein Obama went before the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and attempted to bamboozle them by claiming that racism is an inherent part of the DNA of the United States of America, he was attacking and rewriting our history. It's not true. The reason it is not true is that our very Constitution is quintessentially based off of the natural law tenets that are timeless, and they apply to everyone. They apply to every citizen of the United States. So all of this talk about the Constitution being an outdated document, or being a living document, or being some quaint, antiquated thing that should be discarded immediately and replaced with the tenets of Fabian socialism, that's all a bunch of hogwash designed to enslave you, the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, to big government. Stop and think about what it is that they always oppose. It's big government, it's big pharmaceutical, big oil, big business, big corporations, big telecommunications, big whatever. But it's never big government. No. Somehow, opportunism in the pursuit of alleged public service is viewed and deemed by the salivating mainstream media, by those professors hiding in their ivory towers of academia, as pure. Whereas wanting to build a better future for you and your family, to build something with your own hands and to keep the fruits of your labor, no, that's dastardly. You see what that is, folks? That is the poisonous doctrine of Marxism. And Marxism is being peddled by the Fabian socialists as a tool, much like Keynesian economics, designed to tear apart and destroy the Constitution, which outlines, defines, and mandates the proper scope and application of government. They must tear down what came before. It is the only way that their ideas can be initiated and adopted, because they cannot win in the marketplace of ideas, because they are intellectually disingenuous and intellectually bankrupt. There is no way to escape that, no way to sugarcoat it, no way to deny it, because history has shown time and again that any place that attempts to adopt and implement the tenets of socialism, whether it be in the guise of democratic socialism, as Noid-faced boy me Sanders defines himself, or whether it's in the guise of progressivism or whatever other ism they come up to define it with, it fails because it is inherently against the law of nature. Whereas the United States Constitution, that great social contract and compact between the citizens of the United States of America and their government, that is by its nature based on the law of nature, or natural law tenets. We follow the natural order of things because that defines who we are. It takes us to the next step. It propels us to that greater future that we are looking for. That is the spirit of our founding fathers. That is what they wanted. That was what their hopes and desires were put forth to achieve. But they wouldn't achieve it in the type of system that Chris Christie wanted. And by endorsing Donald J. Trump, Christie is putting his stamp of approval of lukewarm conservatism, which isn't even conservatism, on the front runner. And the front runner's failure to vociferously distance himself from David Duke also harms him in the general election, because it means that every caricature that the left has painted of the right and of those in this country who want nothing more than to preserve that sacred document, our shared Constitution, is somehow given validity. Why? Because enough people in the party have been duped to march in lockstep with the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. That's not a pretty image. That is an image that it will take generations to recover from if he is propelled into the nomination. Because the Fabian socialists are relentless and have a design, a plan that is century-long, that they can do this in 100 years' time, and they've been working tirelessly to achieve that goal for the past 100 years. They will absolutely set up that straw man. But instead of kicking it down, they'll ignite the straw man and use our Constitution as the kindling of the fire that will destroy the very body politic of the United States of America. That is how serious this election cycle is. And I don't say this out of a sense of fear-mongering. And I don't say it out of a sense of trying to hoodwink the people. No, the ones that are hoodwinked are those that have been bamboozled by a candidate whom a man in a white hood said to go out and support. That is reality. And it shows exactly why Donaldus, Caesar Trumpus, would not be able to win the general election. Do you think for an instant that either Hillary Clinton or nerd-faced Boyd Me Sanders would hesitate to attack Donald for that endorsement by a Klansman? No, they would use that to create a hypocritical argument that would make them appear to be superior. And people would shut off their mental faculties. And all of the people that claim that, well, I see all of these Democrats saying they'd vote for Donald. No, when this information comes out, because that is the party of political correctness. That is the party that is going out of its way to strip us of our rights. There is no way that they would try and work against that. There is no way that they would go against the Democrat Party because they would become social pariahs in their own social circle. And when you're socialist, society or social things are all that matter. They're all that matter. And so they're going to double down on that. They're going to say, nope, I cannot support this candidate. And you're not going to have the conservative base of the party support him because of endorsements like that, but also because of the nasty way that he has campaigned, because of his consistently inconsistent past and history, because of everything that he has stood for in the past is diametrically opposed to what he stands for now. And I would reach out to the supporters of Donald J. Trump and say, please pull your head out of the sand. You're not an ostrich. You are a fellow citizen. And yes, we should all coalesce around a proven constitutional conservative, and that is Ted Cruz. This is the last stand, folks. Cruz is a Texan. And 2016 marks the 180th year that Texas won its independence from Mexico. In 1835, at a little place called Gonzales, Texas, the opening shots of that great struggle for independence began. And then, in the spring of the following year, after facing two major defeats, the Alamo and then the defeat at Goliad, General Sam Houston was able to rally the Texian forces. And in 18 minutes, despite staggering near insurmountable odds, they came together and defeated the elite of the Mexican army and captured their generalissimo, their el jefe, their dictator, Antonio Lopez de Santana. And in so doing, he allowed the Republic of Texas to come about. That was 180 years ago. But during that time, the Alamo was in threat. And now We can compare the Alamo to the nation. We have to draw a line in the sand, folks. And we must be willing to do whatever is necessary to stand on the line to ensure that the forces of liberty can come through. Let's stand on the side of liberty. Let's stand on the side of our natural law tenets, just as the brave Texans who defended the Alamo did. Let's be like Washington's forces, who faced down insurmountable odds and overcame them in order to achieve victory for the cause of independence and the cause of liberty and justice. But we cannot do that by handing over the reins of political power to a man who has no principles or convictions. A man who says he's going to make Mexico fund the wall. How? Do you realize that Mexico really doesn't have any money? That all of that money is controlled by the drug cartels? Do you think that the drug cartels are going to allow Mexico to pay for something that would stop their trade? Not in a heartbeat. Not at all. They will fight us tooth and nail. They will start killing the people who try to build the wall. But there is a way to do it. And that is to ramp up our border security, as Ted Cruz has promised. And that is to be proactive with respect to the Constitution. And above all, that means enforcing the law. Now, you notice not once has Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus ever said that part of his plan is to enforce the law, to enact and enable law enforcement to do what is necessary. You know what else Donaldus has not done? Stood in support of our law enforcement as they are coming under attack by these Fabian socialist, cultural Marxist organizations such as Black Lives Matters. Instead, he gets the flip side of that. He gets the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke, to support him. Folks, the new Black Panthers and the Black Lives Matters organizations and all of these race-baiting organizations are the flip side of the same coin that the KKK belongs to. But never forget that Donaldus has a history of schmoozing with the race hucksters, people like the good Reverend Jesse Jackson, who had a child outside of wedlock, or Al Sharpton. He was good friends with them. He donated money to them. He helped them. He enabled them. That is the ugly truth of what Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus represents. And that is not something that we can stand or tolerate in this country right here and right now, because we are at the point of no return. As I've said, and as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, have said, and as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, has said, we are the popular sovereigns. We are the only ones that can save this government, and we can start by saying no to Donald J. Trump. Folks, Donald J. Trump is attempting to negotiate away your fundamental and unalienable rights. Those very rights that are, by their nature, non-negotiable. That is what he's trying to do. That is what he's looking to pull off. But it can't be done. It absolutely cannot be done in this great representative republic of ours. And the reason that it cannot be done is it goes against the supreme law of the land. But that is part and parcel the problem. Donald J. Trump doesn't think rules apply to him. And while that may seem inspirational in a time of lawlessness that we have experienced through the 7 years that Barack Hussein Obama has wielded the reins of political power in this country. It is not what will solve the problems in this country. Indeed, it would merely exacerbate the problem. The solution, the key, has been with us since the foundation of this country over 230 years ago. And that solution and foundation is none other than our shared Constitution. And let me remind you, folks, that that Constitution, that sacred document, it belongs to we the people. It doesn't belong to Donald Trump. It's not for sale. And it damn sure isn't up for negotiation. So I'm not going to reach out and lease that to Donald. And we shouldn't reach out and sell out our values. That is not who we are as a people. It is not who we are as a nation, and it will not be tolerated. And that is why Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus cannot win. Folks, he cannot win. And we should not betray the roots of who we are as a nation. Donald J. Trump is no different than Hillary Clinton. Because if he was a man of character, he wouldn't have invited Hillary into his wedding. And before you just blow that off as just merely doing business, no, there's a difference between being a principled businessman and there's a difference between being a charlatan, a snake oil salesman, a man that is out to enrich himself only at the expense of others, instead of being a man who's willing to come together to exchange goods and services for a medium. An exchange of goods and services. That is the free market. But the problem is, Donald doesn't really support that. Donald doesn't really believe in that. Donald thinks he's superior and knows best. That type of haughty attitude will only weaken America's position within the arena of global politics. It will weaken us at home. It will place our Constitution at greater threat. And it will continue the status quo, which is the death spiral of this country. You think you're angry now, folks? Wait until you see what he does. Wait until you see what he would do to your liberties. And all because you were mad and blinded by rage. Be angry, yes. But be logical and reasonable about that anger and how you utilize that anger and how that anger is put forward. Because when you do that, then you get results. Remember, America, you didn't support Chris Christie. That's why he dropped out. But Chris Christie and Donald Trump are hardly different. They are not who they claim to be. They do not represent what they claim to represent, and they are polarizing forces which would weaken conservatism, and in the case of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, would absolutely harm principled constitutional conservatives and libertarian types. We can't afford that. We can't afford to accept that, and we cannot afford to embrace that as a part of our character, spirit, heritage, and identity. So you see, we are at the crossroads in this country. We can either bow down and accept what the Fabian socialists have done, or we can coalesce behind a principled constitutional conservative, and there is but one such candidate who remains and who is vying for the office of president, and that is Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Again, I'm not telling you how to vote, but this is really what matters. You need to hold yourself accountable, as well as the politicians. That is what matters. And remember what the now late Associate Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said in a 2010 commencement address. Never, ever compromise your principles. That means you don't negotiate on your principles. You don't sell your principles. Yes, you may work with someone who disagrees to reach a common ground, but you don't do it in such a way that negotiates your principles, that undermines your principles. Because if you do that, then you yourself become a charlatan. That is what Donald Julius Caesar Trumpus represents. And we cannot have it in this country, especially when our identity is at risk, when our sovereignty is at risk. We have to look back to the basics, as I have said, and those basics remain, and always shall remain, as our shared Constitution. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. As always, ladies and gentlemen, I'm your Captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. What's more, I invite you to leave questions, comments, concerns, either here on our YouTube site, or on our Google Plus page, or our Facebook page. And I also invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationX. That's all one word, @RadioAviationEX, @RadioAviationEX. And I invite you to join Jeremy and me the next time we take off over the friendly airwaves, leaving you with an indelible yet pure sense of enlightenment, unlike any other radio program or venue out there. Once again, folks, thank you for flying the Wright Flyer. We will see you next time. Do take care.